Well, good evening, everybody, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever in the beautiful world you are. I hope you are having a wonderful weekend, and I'm looking forward to having, well, we call him Dr. Jerry Marzinsky with me again this evening, and we're going to be talking about manufacturing madness. Very interesting topic. The DSM as an instrument of social control. So, for those of you who don't know Dr. Jerry, I've done many interviews with him over the years, and he is our resident mental health expert, and especially dealing with schizophrenia. But without any further ado, I'm going to bring him on. Hello, Jerry. Welcome back. How are you?
Again, I'm doing good. It's a little bit hot in Tucson. It hit yesterday. I think it hit 109 degrees or something like that. It's warm.
That is desert heat.
Yeah,
That's the type of heat I grew up in. Wow.
yeah. The summers are no fun in the desert.
No, they're not. I must say, today also, we can definitely feel summer's on the way. Beautiful warm day. It's been amazing.
Oh, it's
So,
winter for you guys, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And we've had a very temperamental winter, that's for sure. But the last 2 days, it's been warm. So we're happy.
That's good.
Always good when the sun comes out. Anyway, I'd love to hear more about our topic this evening, manufacturing madness. So tell us, well, maybe before we even go ahead, let me just pop up your banner, and you can just tell our viewers, what you're up to, where they can get hold of you, all those lovely things.
Well, I'm a MACE therapist. It's I've been in the front lines of mental health for over 40 years, I believe, and I've never seen anything work as well as MACE as far as a psychotherapy. It's quick and it's permanent. Um, I'm a practitioner. uh, Other than that, I've been doing interviews on YouTube, social media, exposing psychiatry and kind of what they're up to. So that's what I'd like to talk a little bit about that today. And we're going to be working off the works of a psychiatrist, a rebellious psychiatrist who speaks the truth. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit into the background of psychiatry. Back in the 1800s, there was a big battle between psychiatry and neurology, and psychiatry was losing badly because what they were doing didn't work. You had Sigmund Freud and that kind of stuff. Nobody could afford that kind of stuff, and even so, it didn't work. So in 1891, a derivative of phenothiazine, which is what they use, it's the first antipsychotic drug that ever emerged. Okay, it was found in a dye lab in Germany by accident. Okay, and the people working in that dye lab, I guess it was dyes for clothes, were getting all gorked out, tranquilized. They couldn't stay awake at their stations, and uh, um, so a French drug company came over and took a look at this dye and extracted the active ingredient of that tranquilizer, phenothiazine. Okay, so this flies in the face of the drug companies saying, "Oh yeah, we have to charge 10 times more for psychiatric drugs here in the U.S. than anywhere else because of the exorbitant research fees." They're making billions of dollars a year off of these drugs, and they didn't do any research into it at all. It was found by the French and the Germans. When it first came to Europe, they used it as antihistamine. They used it as an anesthetic for surgery and drugging down. Well, they eventually started drugging down psychiatric populations. But the Freudians kicked up their heels and said, no, you're not going to be using this on psychiatric patients in Europe. So they brought it over to the United States, got access to a psychiatric hospital, and drugged down the entire psychiatric population. And of course, the staff and the administration went, "This is wonderful. This is great. These guys are all gorked out. They're sitting around on their butts, staring off into space. They're not causing us any trouble, and they're calmer." So it took off from there, and that's where uh, psychiatry got their foot back on the ground again in their battle with neurology. Okay, so they had been using barbaric treatments like to treat schizophrenics. They were giving them stuff that would make them sick, that would make them throw up. You know how you feel after you throw up. You just don't feel like doing anything. You're sick. So these guys would give them emetics to make them puke, and then that was their treatment. They were also using insulin overdoses to shock the schizophrenics. They eventually started using lobotomies where they'd go in and they'd stick an ice pick through your eye and scramble your prefrontal cortex. They even had a lobotomy mobile here in the United States back in the day, where they would drive around and people would line up and have difficult relatives have their brain scrambled. And I remember meeting one of those guys when I worked at Central State Hospital. My impression was they're just not human. They're not quite human. You could just feel it. You could sense it.
When you say they're not quite human, I'd love to know, because obviously you're very intuitive as well. You're around these dark entities a lot. So I totally get what you mean, but maybe you can explain to us how you experience these guys, that, because I agree they're not human, to be able to do the stuff that they do, and you can't, you're missing something, right? You can't treat
Yeah,
another, there's something not okay.
right.
And I agree.
Their whole prefrontal cortex, the executive function of the brain, was gone. So they had no motivation. Um, they were just very docile. They couldn't think, they couldn't process information the way we do. And it was just like a gut level feel that you could tell something was just wrong. And I only met one. They were doing that back in the 30s, I believe. They were doing those lobotomies. They've stopped doing them since, but they're doing with these psychiatric drugs that they're giving now. They cause, with long-term use, they cause permanent neurological damage. The phenothiazines I've seen in the state hospital when I worked there. These people couldn't walk with a normal gait. They just shuffled. They called it the Thorazine shuffle. So these drugs were slowly killing their brain. Okay? And what I witnessed them doing when they started showing the side effects of these drugs, which is like a tremor, they would just start tremoring. So that was a toxic side effect of these antipsychotic drugs. So what I saw them doing, instead of cutting back on those things or cutting them off and trying something else, they just administered cogentin, which masked that trembling, so it no longer appeared, but the damage was still going on. And this is permanent neurological damage, and it's happening today. Now, they won't tell their patients that. I've never seen a psychiatrist tell their patients about this neurological damage these particular drugs cause. And it's kind of pushed down in the reports. You know.
I've actually first, I'd like to just say something here. Mrs. 957, who's in the chat, I'm really sorry for your loss. But Jerry, I'd like to just hear your thoughts on this. What she's saying is her daughter passed away on July 17th this year, so very recently. She was mentally tortured to death. The voices in her head never left her alone. I'm sure you would have dealt with situations like that in the past. I don't know. Do you have any words for her? I mean, it's such a tragic way to lose your daughter. I'm really, really sorry
Yeah,
that you've been through that.
because those voices, the psychiatric mafia insists are um, auditory hallucinations caused by a biochemical imbalance of the brain. All right. And that's their justification for using these antipsychotic drugs, these toxic antipsychotic drugs. Okay. So one of the first things I saw when I went to work at this huge psychiatric hospital was I was brainwashed coming out of graduate school also that these voices were auditory hallucinations. So you think hallucinations, you think like word salad, that it's just verbal garbage. But one of the first things I saw was these psychiatric patients who were diagnosed schizophrenic were talking to these voices. They were interacting with them. They were arguing with them. They were cursing them. They were having conversations with them. And it was like listening to somebody talking over the telephone. You could hear what they were saying, but you couldn't hear what was coming in over the telephone. So I'm like, that doesn't make sense. If they're hallucinations, they should be all over the place like hallucinations. Some are positive, some are negative, some are, but you would think a hallucination didn't make any sense. These guys, they were carrying on coherent conversations with these voices, right? The other thing I saw was that when I took my patients into the psychiatrist office, and to have them diagnosed and medicated, here they're saying it's a chemical, for those that are schizophrenic, chemical imbalance of the brain. And so I sat there and I watched time after time after time as these psychiatrists just asked these patients a few questions. And from that, they picked a antipsychotic drug to start them on. Okay, so you would think if they had a biochemical imbalance in their brain, they would give them some kind of lab test or EKG or blood work or something to find out what chemicals were out of balance and how much. Never happened, ever. And I started asking about that, and they don't have any test to test for a chemical imbalance of the brain. So where did that diagnosis come from? They freaking made it up. They had no other, it looked like it was something. So they started out with, it's the mothers who were the cause of schizophrenic. The mothers did something to these patients that made them psychotic. Didn't feed them, didn't nurse them, didn't something or other. So when the mothers complained and said, "Hey, we didn't do anything. What did we do?" They forgot that one. So then they went to the genetic explanation for schizophrenia. Oh, there's a genetic gene, and the researchers would go, "Where is it? We can't find it." Well, it's probably not one gene. It's a whole bunch of genes, and they're all mixed together, and we'll find it eventually. We haven't found it yet, but we know we will. They never found the genetic cause for schizophrenia. All right. So they made up this chemical imbalance of the brain, and that has now been solidly disproven. It was a lie at the time. It was made up by Eli Lilly drug company in order to explain how their antidepressant drugs worked back in the 60s. And then the pharmaceutical industry just jumped on it. Okay. And they provided grants to anybody who would, provide evidence that mental illness was due to some kind of brain abnormality due to chemicals. All right. So the that stuff started. The drug industry started back in 1910 with the Rockefellers, and the Carnegie Foundation. Rockefeller was the one who brought Standard Oil, and he was one of the multimillionaires back in the 1910s. So him and the Carnegie Foundation pushed through the infamous Flexner Report, which shut down licensing for medical schools for any medical school not teaching pharmacological medicine. And they outlawed it. Any school that didn't teach pharmacologically based medicine was not allowed to graduate doctors. They petitioned the U.S. Congress, paid them off to pass this ridiculous law. So at that point, naturopathy became illegal. What do you call it? The pinpricking Chinese thing became illegal. Electrotherapy that Tesla was coming up with became illegal, and any doctor who referred their patients to one of these other therapists was thrown out.
What Mrs. 957 is saying, and I agree, is that vaccines, when the baby vaccines, she's saying as well, she didn't go through any of that stuff with her child when her child was a baby. Loved, well loved, but possibly the baby vaccines, because I know I've done interviews in the past, especially with a South African lady who vaccinated her son, and he immediately went into severe autism. And even, he lived until he was 33 or 32, and then he eventually passed away. But definitely vaccine injury. And I was actually thinking about that with a lot of these cases as well. Do you think that this could be brought on by some of the baby vaccines?
Oh, in my opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at, what is it, like 37 vaccines that they're giving kids now?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have no doubt, because before a certain age, it didn't, year, it picked up, when these vaccines started increasing. And thank God, Kennedy, our health administrator now, cut the amount of vaccines by in half or 2/3 that they're giving kids now. So yeah, I have little doubt that it's due to the vaccines.
I definitely feel that is, and that is an area that I think just when we're looking at mainstream media as well, it's hardly ever been spoken about. But when I was speaking to Adi, this lady who lost her son, what she was saying as well was that there is a massive amount of baby injuries from the vaccines, and it's never reported on. They're forever taking it, covering it up with something else. And that's another thing, where I think exactly what we're discussing now, a lot of issues that people have that they can't describe, even child issues, strange illnesses, strange outbreaks, strange rashes, whatever it was. I definitely feel that is coming from, or a lot of it is coming from, the baby vaccinations, childhood vaccinations.
Yeah, and look what psychiatry is doing. This was, I think these were from 2017, these statistics, and they're worse now. back in 2000, about 2017, 622,730 23 kids under the age of 5 were being treated with psychiatric drugs. Over 80,000 were on ADHD drugs. It, that's Ritalin, Adderall, Atarax. These are all methamphetamines. And I talked to prisoners when I worked in the psychology department at the prison, where they started off with these prescribed amphetamines, and then just kept going until they lost control of it and ended up in prison for murder or robbery, whatever. Okay.
Do you
Now,
think then that, if we're looking at this situation the way that it is, and people are losing their lives in these situations, would you say it's the entities or the drugs?
well, it's both because there's a lot of these psychiatric drugs, especially the antipsychotics, are fatal. And there's a line in this paper that I'm going to turn to in a little bit, where it talks about it, antipsychotic drugs being like the third uh, killer in the United States. Now, so you got that going on, but you do have these entities. The voices that these people hear are not
Mm,
auditory hallucinations.
yeah.
And I have not a doubt in my mind, after 40 years of studying these things, these are negative demonic entities that are feeding off the negative energy that they generate. You know,
Yeah.
they're constantly telling the victim, "You're stupid, you're ugly, you're crazy, nobody likes you. You know, we're going to kill you," or people are following you around. It's all paranoid. They don't call it paranoid schizophrenia for nothing.
Right.
These voices are
Right.
constantly filling their heads with toxic, paranoid
And then
information.
and then I've no doubt as well there would be the suicidal thoughts that come into that, do
Mhm.
this. I mean, oftentimes when I've spoken to people who've had the voices, they would say it starts off just suddenly. It's like it's not your own thought, but before long, it starts becoming like it's your own thought. And the voice says, do this, do that, or kill your parents, or
Yeah.
hurt the cat, or, whatever. It's suddenly something so out of character, oftentimes, right?
Well,
That they would,
that's a big struggle for schizophrenics to try to figure out the voice they're hearing in their head, whether it's them or whether it's something else, because it doesn't sound like anything different. There's no like, "We are the voices and we command you to."
yes,
No, it's not like that at all. It sounds
just a
just like the
different type of
thousands of
thought.
others. It's a
Yes,
different type of thought.
yes,
It doesn't have the person's best interest in mind.
right, right,
Its intent
right,
is very different. It's evil intent. You know,
right,
and, but
exactly.
but if I've had a number of prisoners that would ask these voices, "Who are you? What are you?" And the voices every time responded, "We are you." So they want the victim to think that that voice they're hearing in their head is them. Okay,
Sure.
so
Of course. And I think that over time, especially if, let's say, and again, I think about that movie that we've spoken about before, which was very significant for me because it showed this violent prisoner, murderer in the most atrocious ways, right? And he speaks to um, this lawyer guy, whatever, before. And, it's from the age of 4, he had this entity. And it's like, I'm sure it must become like them eventually, right?
yeah,
Like a skin that just kind of like a virus that's now part of your makeup. You can't like get rid of it, but you also know that it's so destructive. You also might know, you might have coherence at some point thinking or understanding this is not really me. You might have those flashes in between, right? So, and I would imagine then that that is such a dichotomy. It's such polar opposites, such extremes for the person to have to go through that,
Well,
you
see,
know, the
that's the
extreme.
problem. Not all of them realize that that voice is not who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we from the time we're born, you're virtually told every thought you have in your head belongs to you. That's way wrong. That's way wrong. Matter of fact, Swedenborg, a Christian mystic, says none of your thoughts are your own. They either come from heaven or hell or someplace in between. Psychiatry has never found a thought in anybody's head. Okay? So, and you
Yeah.
notice they don't even look at thoughts. You can't measure them, they can't see them, they can't feel them, you can't smell them, you can't taste them. So they want, oh well, they, we won't even deal with them. Okay? It's the thoughts that drive paranoid schizophrenia. If you can get rid of those negative thoughts by any means at all, the person returns to normal overnight.
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen it
It's like
over and
it's
over
like
and
a
over
pit
again.
that it's like this pit that sucks them in, right?
It does.
Sucks you in those thoughts. And
And
when you get yourself out of that vortex of negative thoughts, wow, everything starts changing actually.
yes, and they will tell the person to kill themselves, and schizophrenics
Mm.
have a uh, 5 times higher suicide rate than the normal population. Okay? And it's because these voices tell them to kill themselves. They say, "Well, nobody likes you. Everybody hates you. Life isn't worth living. You're stupid. You're ugly. You don't stand a chance. Why don't you just kill yourself and get it over with?" I've heard that story from patients over and over again, and you would wonder because they feed off the negative energy that these voices generate, the negative
Yeah, of
emotional
course.
energy. So you go, well,
Whoosh.
why would they kill their food source? And I didn't have an answer for that for years until somebody and says, okay, look at what happens. Once a person commits suicide, their whole family is thrown into turmoil. They start blaming
Exactly.
themselves. I should have known. I should have done something. Da da da. They blame themselves for years and years and years. So now the whole family is now generating that negative emotional energy.
And then it will usually go and attach itself to, and that's where the ancestral curses, if you want to call it, right,
Yeah.
comes in, because then that entity will then generally go and attach itself to one of the, as you say, grieving siblings. And remember as well, what that movie that I was, same movie I was talking about, at the end, he has to be electrocuted. And it's like the entity talks to this guy and he says, like in this crazy voice, he says, they choose the most painful way to go, that the body is going to be in the most excruciating pain. And this guy, like, and he was laughing and he says, yes, and it won't be the first time. So he was really going to have a hard time dying, right? But because the more pain that is generated during that electrocution, that's exactly what they want. They want that pain.
Yes. Yeah.
Like we seek that bliss, they seek that pain. So they're going to look for the most torturous way, and especially from the host body, right? And situation, right? For that, their host to live life, because as you say, that's what generates their fuel and that's what keeps them going. And then, of course, moves on to the next unsuspecting victim.
Yeah. And
Generational curses.
I remember when I was working at the state prison. Um, we visited the gas chamber where they would gas prisoners sentenced to death. Okay, and what they would do is they would bring them into a cell facing the gas chamber,
Oh
like
my God.
24 hours ahead of time. So they would just sit there and stare at that gas chamber with nothing else to do.
That is torture.
I know. I know.
Oh my God.
I went into that gas chamber and sat in that chair, and you could feel it. You could feel it. So I'm convinced the prison is run by these demons, because rehabilitation programs just don't survive. I mean, every rehabilitation program I've seen this prison try to start eventually died. No, nothing that tried to help was ever survived that place. I watched rehabilitation program after rehabilitation program after program just die on the vine.
Yeah, because as you say, it's these demonic entities that are running the show and they don't want any of that in there. I mean,
Mm-mm.
they literally feed off. And I can imagine, even the staff that work there, Jerry, they must be a little bit sugared in the head as well. I'm
Well,
sure a
it,
lot of
it
the staff that work there must have voices and all sorts of strange things happening. That would be actually an interesting show to do,
well
right?
it I could tell you that it's a place where nobody wanted to be except maybe the warden and a few supervisors. So you have like 10,000 patients there and hundreds of staff. None of us wanted to be there. You know, you're basically working for the retirement. And it was like we had a sentence also because we'd always ask each other, how much more time you got? It's like before you could
Right.
get out of here, it's like we were prisoners of the system also. Because when I first went to work there, it was relatively pleasant. It was small. They had rehabilitation programs for the prisoners. They allowed you to develop programs and work with them and spend time with them and try to help them. But as the years passed and more prisoners came in, all of that just vanished. So after 10 years, it became awful. But by 10 years, you're vested in the uh, what do you call it, the retirement program. And if you quit at that
Machine.
point in the machine, if you quit at that point, you lose everything. You lose all your retirement.
Isn't
And
it
it was
interesting how they trap us, right? But I mean, I find that very interesting. So I want to just reverse. Let's go back to when you say you started there and there were rehabilitation programs and stuff like that. Did that help them? Did people leave there? Like, were they better off? Were
eh,
they actually able to function normally again in society? What was the success rate with the rehabilitation programs you had for
well,
these prisoners?
what I saw them doing is they would provide uh, high school education. They would provide some college courses. They would provide vocational education. So they would teach people to be like cosmetologists or auto repair or um, what else did they have? Janitorial services. It's kind of low level jobs where they would have a job when they left.
Right,
You know,
right.
and that
And
did work.
I was going to say, was it successful? I mean, it must be because I think a lot of the prisoners, I mean, they go there because they have no resources or no
Right.
guidance or have had really crappy beginnings in life. So it's good to see that there are quite a few, or were, from what you're saying, quite a few prisons that actually implemented these things because I can imagine that immediately is better for your mental health.
Well,
Now that you go out
they
feeling
they
better about yourself as well.
they even had big gardens where they let them grow vegetables that would feed them. You know, but as the prison grew bigger and bigger and became more and more expensive, the legislature the state legislature said, "Hey, we can't afford all this stuff. You're going to have to cut something." So what they
Sure.
cut? They cut the rehabilitation programs.
So what does that do in the long run? Just brings more people back.
That's
You know,
right.
the question is
It's a big.
exactly.
It
And
just
there
goes
again,
round and round.
why were more and more people being in prison? So perhaps they should have been looking for preventative measures rather than trying to find and hustle for a cure and then take away the one lifeline, right, that actually gives people hope and rehabilitates people. But instead, you're now cramming more and more people in, more and more frustration, more and more anger, more and more loosh, more and more mental health issues,
Right.
more and more hurt,
Violence and
pain.
criminal behavior.
Wow.
It's a sick
It's
system.
so it's so organized, man. This is organized crime. Seriously.
It's organized. I remember I heard one of the wardens, the deputy warden, say, "Oh yeah, this is job security. The more prisoners, the better." That's you know they hire people who think like that. You know,
Wow.
and if you try to help out the prisoners, they call you a inmate lover or something like that. You know, they post pictures of women standing over men with a shotgun. This is one of their recruiting posters. You know, it's like it's a sick system. It's a very sick system, and even to the point of uh, with psychiatry, they used to do was if they had a schizophrenic, they would give him antipsychotic medications because they didn't want him causing any problems. So then they went from there to okay, if they're not causing problems, don't give them any medication because it's too expensive. All right. So it got to the point where they didn't want to give out medications at all because the psychiatrist was under pressure to not give out so many medications. And with what I knew about the voices, there was one patient I had one time where the voices were telling him to kill another inmate, and they were getting stronger and stronger. So I sent him to the medical unit for them to be medicated. But the chief psychologist put a stooge over that unit to kick them back with a different diagnosis. All right. Because they didn't want to spend the money on the medications. So I sent this crazy guy over there who was clearly schizophrenic, said, this guy's ramping up. He's going to hurt somebody. And the stooge psychologist over there changed the diagnosis to personality disorder and kicked him back. So here's this guy ramping up further and further. I sent him over there a second time and said, okay, he's threatening this guy. He's getting more and more agitated. He's getting more and more paranoid. He's going to blow. You need to do something with this guy. They sent him back again. No change at all to save the medications. All right. So this guy's getting worse and worse and worse. And I have other inmates coming to me now saying, listen, he's about to lose it. So I sent him there a third time with all this documentation as to this guy is going, he's going. Here's all the symptoms. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what these other guys are seeing. Here's what the psych nurse is saying. They sent him back again the third time. A week later, he stabbed another inmate 13 times. And I was so angry. I couldn't go to work for 2 days because I was afraid I'd beat the crap out of the chief psychologist who did this. All right. And then when he saw what I wrote, he put another psychologist over me to check everything that I wrote into the medical record.
Wow. So he didn't like, I mean, in a situation like this, who actually takes responsibility for that?
Nobody. They got away with it.
So it's just a crazy inmate.
Yeah, it's just crazy inmates. Don't believe inmates. They're all liars. They kind of indoctrinate you when you first get into this prison system to think, well, they're not quite human. They're all liars. You can't trust any of them ever. And for a
I
good
wonder,
many, that's true, but it's not generically true. and they will size you up when when a new staff person comes in. They'll size you up to see what they can get away with and what they can't. So it's especially for women. It's especially dangerous.
So I want to just again, you were saying earlier on that prisoners on death row, literally the last 24 hours before they are gassed, right?
Yeah.
They literally sit, they put them facing the gas
They, yeah.
chamber for 24 hours. Tell me the modus operandi behind that. Why do they do that? And what have you
Well,
I mean,
I thought it was sick, but what could I say?
so
You
did
know,
you ever manage to speak to any of the prisoners before I mean, after they'd had their 24 hours, or
no.
what were the others saying about
See,
it?
I didn't hear anybody say anything about it. It's just the way it was.
What do you
It's,
think? Why were they doing it? What was the
it,
MO
that
behind them doing that, other than just
that's what it
torturing
was.
them?
It was just vengeance. You killed somebody, so now it's your turn. They would give them a last meal, whatever they asked for. They pretty much give them a last meal, go out and get it. But then they'd be sitting there 24 hours looking at that gas chamber.
Wow. It's that to me is quite shocking as well, because I mean, in the movies we kind of see, okay, well, they go there, blah blah blah, but they kind of have quite a nice last day. They give them a nice last day. That's kind of what the movies tell us, right? And you say
No,
with their favorite meal, and maybe they get to see their family again and say their goodbyes, stuff like that. I mean, that is just wild. I mean, and that's such a contentious issue, or topic, because there will be people that say, well, yes, they deserve that because they wouldn't be in the gas chamber if they were very nice people. But wow, is that really necessary?
well, they don't advertise it, so people don't know about it.
For sure, I get that.
And there's certain guards with when they were doing the I guess it was the electric chair. It was in Georgia when I was working in the state hospital there. There was a prison there also, and I had a friend who had a friend who was a guard there, and they were electrocuting people, and they were looking for volunteers. There were actually some of the guards that would just volunteer to go do the switch. Yeah.
Over here, when in the days that the death penalty was legal, we had hanging, right? No one knew who the hangman was. That was something that was kept a secret from everyone.
I
Or I
think they had
guess,
something like that there too, where they had three different switches and nobody knew which one actually did the killing.
that's insane.
So they kept the place under control with these psychiatric drugs. You know, and they're keeping the whole population under control with these things. 1 in 6 American adults is on some kind of psychiatric medication. These
And
drug companies are making a fortune. They're making billions of dollars a year selling these toxic drugs.
and that's what we were chatting about just before we got on, that 1 in 6 Americans is taking some type of psychiatric drug, and women in their 50s and 60s, 1 in 4. Now, why do you think that is? That's very disturbing.
Well, they want to keep them under control. That's the only reason. They're causing some kind of social disruption. Children as young as 4 are being put on antipsychotic drugs originally approved for schizophrenic adults. And these drugs are causing brain damage. They're giving them to kids. You know, the 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 DSM, that diagnostic manual we were talking about earlier, you know, it's expanded from 106 disorders in 1952 to over 300 today. So they're manufacturing these psychiatric disorders. They're making them up out of thin air, out of
And
groups
then
of
telling the
behaviors.
and then telling the world that human beings are not coping mentally or emotionally, whatever it is, right? So therefore creating more and more toxic drugs. It's like the same thing with the jab, right? Oh no, you have no control over your health. Your body is, they make you believe your body is this pathetic disease, whatever,
Right?
right?
Yeah, and they're
Vita
paying
soup.
psychiatrists to administer to push these drugs. So psychiatrists are legal drug pushers. They're expanding these psychiatric categories astronomically. Look at a couple hundred over the last couple few years, and they're still doing it. They have a group of psychiatrists that meet once every 3 years, and they said the inside of that place was like a tobacco auction where these psychiatrists come in and go, "Hey, I got a new psychiatric diagnosis. It's this, this, this," and you got these 2/3 of these people are from big pharma, thinking, "Oh, well, can we make a drug that would treat this?" You know,
Oh, it's so
they've
annoying. Wow.
psychiatric drugs have become the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. They found that only there's a landmark study called the STAR-D study. They found that only 3% of patients remained well after 1 year on these psychiatric drugs. 97% failure rate, hidden behind the label of therapeutic success. So these drugs don't work. They just don't work. And they're making billions of dollars. All they do is treat the symptoms. You know? So, in 1980, the DSM-3 introduced the oppositional defiant disorder. Okay, so now they had something. Anybody who's resisting the system can now be legally drugged under the diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder. So they're giving it to kids. The police are using it as a diagnosis. It's a blotter. It's like a thought crime thing. You know, Anybody who goes against authority figures is oppositionally defiant, and they can legally drug you with that diagnosis. So, it'd be like Gandhi would have been given an oppositional defiant disorder for going against the Indian government or the British government. Rosa Parks, after declining to move from the seats on that bus, she would have been, these people who made major changes to society would have legally been able to be drugged under that diagnosis. So it's a justification for controlling defiant youth, communities who are defiant, and 10% of American children got the oppositional defiant disorder, in 2016. So here they were, 10% of these kids are being drugged by these toxic, brain destroying drugs. Okay, and the pharmaceutical industry recognized the opportunity with Risperdal. They marketed it for oppositional defiant symptoms. So here they were. Oh yeah, if these kids are giving you any trouble, yeah, just give them this toxic antipsychotic drug. And they generated $4.5 billion in 2007 prescribing these drugs to kids. This is crazy.
This is very, very crazy. I mean, that's very, very crazy indeed. I know, yeah, Ritalin is a very popular drug for the kids. And I freak out every time someone tells me their child is on Ritalin. We've discussed this before, stuff like that is directly related to mothers and not or kids not being nurtured. I'm not blaming mothers. I'm a mother myself. I've been a single mother pretty much throughout my child's upbringing. But I want to tell you, there's since the single mother story, became more popular. That's when I noticed, because I work a lot with kids, I've noticed that's when suddenly ADD, ADHD, blah, 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 all of these funny ailments in kids started being diagnosed. And, it didn't take me long to figure out what was going on because, again, in my day, our mothers were there. They did our homework. They fed us, gave us lunch, that sort of thing. A nurturing environment. And when we go back to that whole Rockefeller story from the 60s, where they brought in women's liberation to A, get more taxes, and B, separate families. So that would be exactly the thing. Children would then go into anxiety that causes these ADDs and ADHDs and all sorts of weird ailments because they are actually not being nurtured. They're being looked after by nannies, aftercares, whatever it is. If it's not a loving grandparent or a parent or something, most children are in trouble when it comes to that. And that's where they're getting them, because again, your child is not being molded with your ideas, right? They've been given oftentimes a completely different set of ideas and what's true and what's valid to what the parents often would. But now the parents have both got to be working because there's so many bills to pay, right?
Yeah.
Anxiety, 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 and that's all the child comes home to. And that is what they react to.
Right. And then they built this infrastructure that took decades to build the legal framework for these professional communities to become enforcement agents. So now psychiatrists will diagnose somebody as mentally ill and they're removed from society.
Exactly. Whether it was true or not, right? And
Whether
they
it's
use
true
that
or
a
not.
lot.
Yeah, I
I think
remember
with you guys, carry on.
I remember one time where this one girl, when I was working in one of the private psychiatric hospitals, the psychiatrist wasn't listening to the patient, the girl, at all. He was just listening to what the mother said about her. And I was listening to the girl, and the girl said, "Hey, I can't get a word in edgewise. The psychiatrist is listening to my mother." And the psychiatrist kept drugging this poor girl more and more and more and more until I stood up and said something about it. And that psychiatrist went nuts. You know, he was an outside psychiatrist. And I brought that up and exposed it. And he demanded that I be fired. He went to my boss and he demanded that I be fired. And thank
Were
God my
you?
boss says, "Hey, I'll decide who's fired on my staff, not you."
Wow. And the crazy thing is that anyone who works with families understands that children are reacting to whatever the parents are doing in the home. I'm sorry. That is, and it's not that the parents are necessarily um, evil or doing terrible things, but very often they're disconnected or busy or arguing or, that sort of thing. The kids get affected by that. And when we're not listening to the kids and we're listening to the parents only, there's a problem. But when I would be working with like families, I'd often have the mom saying to me, "Oh, I want my son to come and see you, or my daughter. There's this and this and this," and I go, "No, I want you first, mommy. You come sit with me for an hour or two, and then I will, through that, understand exactly why the child is going through what they're going through." So all they really need to do is do it differently. Yeah. I mean, that's a whole story for another day. But there's a lot of that, and a lot of that is ignored, in this world of medication and medicine, and especially mental health. There's a lot of very important things that these guys choose to ignore,
Oh,
or they've been.
and they're so deceptive. I mean, psychiatry is so deceptive.
Yeah,
They claim scientific objectivity. Which kind of this they're trying to separate themselves from the abusive stuff that they did in the past. Yet there's no biological markers to validate any psychiatric diagnosis. They don't
no,
have any evidence for any one of those 300 diagnoses. There's no blood tests, there's no lab tests, there's no nothing. They just make up these diagnoses. They get people to buy into them. They got this DSM that's like 6 inches thick with all these psychiatric diagnoses and all these subcategories. And it looks like a work of science. It looks, with all these numbers and 303.10 to basically what that thing is. It's a scheme for them to charge for a particular mental illness. Okay.
but Jerry, I'm going to ask you something now. Have you noticed how protective people are of their illnesses?
Oh yeah.
It's like once the doctor has diagnosed this, it's like become law. So, and then they have to walk away with their packet of pills, otherwise, they don't feel. I have noticed that so often. People will fight to protect what they've been told is wrong. And as someone who works as a healer, I can tell you it's amazing how many people buy into that. I can understand why. It's like when they drink water instead of taking the pill. What's that called again? That method? Not the real, like if they're
Oh,
doing
like a
these
placebo.
placebo effect. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and that's particularly devastating in psychiatry because these made up labels that have no
Exactly.
objective tests. They're telling these people you're a schizophrenic or you're bipolar or you're basically crazy, and they give them, and it does damage to their, then now they walk around going, hey, I'm a schizophrenic.
Exactly. And they own that. It's like going to
Yes,
to to
that, be,
to
that becomes a new
NA,
identity.
yeah, NA or AA saying, yes, my name is Chantal and I'm an alcoholic. I mean, there's one thing acknowledging that you have a problem that you need to deal with, but if you keep telling yourself that, and if you keep identifying as that, of course you're going to be that, you know? I mean, it's incredible to me. That's why I say, the only reason these guys can get to people in the way that they do, in the millions that they're making, is because we believe them. And this is where we as human beings, we have to realize the power of your spirit, your soul, way overrides that. And when we are prepared to say, I don't choose to be labeled as that or that or that. I believe what Jerry Marzinsky is saying. I believe that I can heal this. I'm going to take certain methods and take the steps to do that.
Yeah,
Because as long as we are stuck in the belief that that is your diagnosis and that is the way it's going to be, and you need all of this, and after 3 months, your meds are no longer working for you, and then you've got to go back, and then they try. It's horrible.
yeah.
What these poor
Then they give
people
you
go
another
through.
med, and if that doesn't work, they give
Yeah,
you another med, and it's all medication. They don't even talk to the guy anymore. They go, "Oh, how's your
exactly.
meds doing?" "Oh, well, they're not doing too good." Well, they either increase them, decrease them, switch to another one, and it's just meds, drugs.
And once you
And
sign
it's
that,
worse than that because they go in there and they go, okay, I'm having these symptoms. The psychiatrist tells them, okay, you're schizophrenic. You have to take these drugs for the rest of your life. You've got a chemical imbalance in your brain. It's not fixable. You're doomed. The only thing you can do is take these toxic drugs until you're dead.
Exactly. And which will usually play a role in accelerating that process anyway, because your body at the end of the day can't handle all those chemicals. Your body's not designed to digest all those chemicals. And it's like heavy metals, and along with a host of other things that
Well,
at the
they're
end of the day,
toxic, and the
yeah,
side effects are awful.
yeah,
And most people who are put on antipsychotic medications eventually quit and then go crazy again, because of the toxic side effects. But these drug companies, that's good for them. You know, they here listen to this paragraph here from it's called the Pharmaceutical Money Machine. It said Eli Lilly, the drug company that I talked about earlier, uh, their patent ran out on Prozac and expires in 2001, threatening their 2.6 billion annual revenue for that drug. The company's solution was to expand the market for their other drugs by expanding diagnoses. Internal documents revealed Lilly's Viva Zyprexa, which is an antipsychotic drug. Their campaign specifically targeted children and elderly patient populations for whom the drug wasn't approved. Sales representatives were trained to promote off label uses, earning bonuses based on prescription volume. By 2007, Zyprexa generated $4.8 billion annually, mostly from patients who didn't have schizophrenia. The drugs, which was the drug it was improved for. Johnson and Johnson perfected the diagnostic expansion with the drug risperidol, which was what do they call it? It's a newer antipsychotic drug. The company emails showed executives celebrating that risperidol growth is driven by children and adolescents. They paid $2.2 billion in criminal fines for illegal marketing, but earned $30 billion from the drug. So it was just the cost of business for them. The prosecution revealed their strategy. Fund continuing medical education courses, training doctors to diagnose childhood bipolar disorder and oppositional defiant disorder conditions virtually unknown before the psychopharmacology, the big pharma, promoted these diagnoses. The diagnosis has increased 40-fold with risperidol prescriptions following. So here's the drug companies giving, what do you call it, continuing education to the doctors to sell their drugs that weren't even prescribed in the first place for they go, oh, well, risperidol works for kids that are throwing tantrums too. I just give it to them. Oh, it's okay. I mean, these people are so disgusting.
wow. I mean, it really is, and it it goes on endlessly. And the way I see this, the only way out is for us to realize, more and more of us to realize what we're supporting and the lie that we've been fed, that we need this stuff to be healthy and to feel good, that there's something so fundamentally wrong with you that you can't cope normally. Now, I mean, I understand in extreme conditions, especially in these psychiatric prisons, what have you, those are extreme cases. And yes, I'm not saying people shouldn't take stuff, but I think we have to take our own mental health into our own hands now. And we've got to realize what we're doing, who are we supporting, right? We've got to look for alternatives.
You
That
know,
to me is the only way.
and watch the thoughts that come into your head also, because it's not just schizophrenics who hear those voices. We all do. They hit everybody. They hit all of us. You could be walking down the sidewalk and all of a sudden you get this disgusting thought to slap the guy in front of you, or spit on somebody who's annoying you, or uh, just some absurd action that you would not normally ever do. You know, Swedenborg says those thoughts come in from the dark side. So these things there's energetic entities, they're evil entities, and they can go in there and they can pick up every negative thing that you've ever done and throw it in your face. Their purpose, they want to generate this negative emotional energy that they feed off of. Until psychiatry wakes up and sees that there is no biological cause for schizophrenia, they will never have a cure. That's never going to happen with this kind of money. When they're making billions of dollars a year selling these toxic drugs, they're not going to stop. This is a crime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why we've got to stop. We have to stop. We've got to stop supporting that industry. It begins with us, really, at the end of the day. That's the only way. How do we overthrow that? It's not about overthrowing them, it's about recognizing that they're a bunch of bloody liars. They are here to squeeze every dollar they can out of you, even though they don't need it at all. It's like a game for them. Money is a game for them, right? And
yeah.
manipulation's a game for them. So we've got to align with spirit. And that is so much more powerful than any medication could
Yeah.
ever
And just
give you.
remember, 97% of these drugs that psychiatrists give you cure nothing.
Exactly.
Like 3% of the people get better, and probably not because of the drug. So if you go see a psychiatrist, you're going to walk out of there with a prescription for some kind of toxic drug, and it's going to numb you down. Right? They only treat symptoms. They don't treat the cause of the disease. That's where MACE comes in and actually gets to the actual cause of what's causing the psychological problem.
That is true. That is true. Jerry, we've kind of come to the end of our time today, and I look forward to actually carrying on looking more into this, because there's a lot that we can talk about around these topics here. So thank you. But before we end off today and wrap it up for today, tell us about your MACE. And as those of you know, I've actually been for 2 MACE sessions with Jerry. They are brilliant. So anyone that is dealing with this type of stuff or knows someone who's really willing to look at a different way of doing things, this would be one of the amazing ways that you can start changing that and start getting rid of these voices one step at a time.
What MACE does is it negates past trauma, okay, which is what the voices in schizophrenia feed off of. They feed off of that trauma. And virtually all psychological problems have their base in some kind of trauma. I mean, it's like, you look at schizophrenics, very few of them have not had some severe physical, emotional, or sexual abuse.
Exactly.
It all revolves around trauma. And, I've been trained in all these different kind of psychotherapies. None of them work as quickly or as efficiently as MACE does. Okay? So there's more information about MACE energetic therapy on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. You can go there and read about it. Be glad to sign you up for a session if you're interested. Okay.
Wonderful. Great, Jerry. Anywhere, any shows or anything you're doing this week or the next couple of weeks that you want to share, or everything on your website?
Well, we're just surviving the heat in Arizona right now. It hit 114 degrees Fahrenheit a few days ago. That's enough. That's hot enough to fry an egg on the hood of your car.
That's kind of the temperatures I grew up in. So it's wild. It's wild. It's desert heat, dead desert heat. Nothing moves. Crazy.
Yeah,
Well,
that's true.
good luck. Honestly, I don't envy that kind of heat. Although I love the sun. That's for sure.
Well, you get plenty of
Anyway,
it here. Thank God for air conditioners.
yeah, that's for sure. Whoever invented that thing,
Yeah.
kudos to
Owe
you.
them a debt of gratitude.
Exactly. Okay, guys and girls, I say thank you so much for joining us this evening with another fantastic show with Dr. Jerry. And we'll be talking with him again in a month from now. We speak on the first Saturday of each month. I've always last Saturday first, I always forget. First. We always Jerry joins us on the first Saturday of each month. So, and if you haven't already caught Jerry's previous interviews with me, please do. We've definitely had some amazing guests as well as topics that we've covered all around these subjects. Very interesting. And, I'm a great believer that, when you take control, when you decide, it's a decision you make. When you decide that you can beat whatever it is, you will. It's not going to happen overnight. It's bite-sized chunks, but when there are amazing people out there who can support you through that, that always makes the world difference. So thank you, Jerry. You are certainly one of those. We will see you in a couple of weeks. Take care, everybody. And I will see members, Patreons on Patreon Book Club with Jesse tomorrow at 3 o'clock South African time, Central Africa time. That is 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do know that by now. Okay, guys, take care. God bless you all. Take care of your beautiful selves. If this broke something open, if you recognized yourself in the testimony, if your body responded before your mind understood, the next step isn't more information. It's pattern work. Decode what your nervous system built to survive. Dismantle the story that keeps it running. Reorganize through the body and choose from the person you're becoming, not from the pattern that formed when you were too small to choose. That's Solutions. Link below. The body is the record. Let's listen.